These last 2 years have been incredibly difficult for the world because of the coronavirus, but it is important to remember that this pandemic is neither the first nor the last one to cause so much damage and despair. Numerous pandemics since the beginning of life have wreaked havoc on animal populations periodically. Yet neither animals nor diseases lose the war due to evolution granting each side enhanced abilities to resist and infect respectively. In this infographic, you can see how different diseases have plagued humanity over the course of history. The bubonic plague of the Middle Ages was the worst pandemic by far, with an estimated 200 million deaths. The Black Plague is followed by smallpox, and then the Spanish flu. Although these are pandemics of the past, what if today you and I were exposed to something like the bubonic plague bacteria? And even more curiously, are there fatal, ancient germs on our planet which we do not even know or have records about? Welcome to the Golden Records channel. Climate change is melting permafrost soils that have been frozen for thousands of years. And as the soils melt, they could unearth ancient viruses and bacteria that have been dormant for millennia. In fact, there has already been a case of this occurring in the last decade. In August 2016, in a remote corner of the Siberian tundra, called the Yamal Peninsula, a 12-year-old boy died and at least 20 people were hospitalized after being infected by anthrax. The theory is that, over 75 years ago, a reindeer infected with anthrax died, and its frozen carcass became trapped under a layer of frozen soil, also known as permafrost. But due to an unusual heat wave, the carcass was thawed, and the anthrax spores within its carcass were released into the nearby environment. More than 2,000 reindeer grazing nearby became infected, which then led to a number of human cases. As global warming progresses and countries refuse to take environmental responsibility, incidents like this will happen more frequently. While usually only 50 centimeters of the permafrost layer melts every summer, the depth of permafrost exposure is increasing year by year. Frozen permafrost soil is the perfect place for bacteria to remain alive for very long periods of time, perhaps as long as 1 million years. With temperatures in the Arctic rising 3 times faster than the rest of the world, that means a lot of ice is melting, which increases the likelihood of humanity unintentionally opening a Pandora's box of diseases. So besides this anthrax incident in 2016, what other possible diseases lay dormant in our Arctic ice caps? In 1951, a team of researchers from the University of Idaho began a search for the 1918 influenza virus to better understand its origins. The first reports of influenza deaths pointed to the mass deaths of the Inuit population in 1917. So the researchers went up to Brevig Mission in Alaska and excavated mass graves to extract 8 frozen, dark red, expanded lungs from decades-old corpses. Taking the organic samples back to the lab, 5 susceptible ferrets received nasal instillations of organic material from the corpses. None showed any signs of illness. Although there were trace amounts of bacterial S. pneumoniae, the influenza virus was not recovered. 45 years later, however, a new research team performed a second exhumation at Alaska, and one of the victims they found had very well preserved internal organs due to permafrost. Samples of frozen lung were analyzed and this time yielded several influenza RNA fragments that were extremely similar to modern strains of the influenza virus. Remarkably, the scientists were able to reconstruct the 1918 Spanish flu, thus demonstrating that melting glaciers and permafrost can expose known, devastating diseases to humans today. But what about microbes that humans have never even been exposed to? In a 2005 NASA study, researchers found a prehistoric bacteria in a frozen underground pond in the Arctic parts of Alaska. The microorganisms, known as Carnobacterium pleistocenium, had been frozen since the Pleistocene period, when mammoths still roamed the Earth. Shockingly, once the ice melted, they began swimming around, seemingly unaffected. Dozens of other papers have identified new bacteria species under the huge ice sheets in Antarctica and permafrost soils of the Arctic Circle, and some have been found to contain the genetic signature required to infect humans. Researchers analyze the DNA of candidate bacteria and look for particular genetic sequences. If the sequence matches known sequences associated with infectious diseases, the pathogen is classified as high risk to humans. The danger to humans is even more imminent with viruses than bacteria. In a 2014 study, 2 viruses that had been trapped in Siberian permafrost for 30,000 years were revived. Known as Pythovirus sibericum and Mollivirus sibericum, they are both giant viruses, because unlike most viruses they can be seen under a regular microscope. Once they were revived, the viruses quickly became infectious. Fortunately for us, these 2 particular viruses only infect single-celled amoebas. Still, this study warns us that there might be other viruses, locked away, that could infect humans. Giant viruses are most likely to cause a pandemic because they tend to be very tough and almost impossible to break open by natural environmental conditions. So fine, let's assume some ancient virus does get revived and some people get infected. Won't modern medical science and antibiotics save the world against these ancient wayward pathogens? Surprisingly, many of these remote, frozen bacteria, including those found inside fluid pockets of cave crystals, have exceptional antibiotic resistances. These extremophiles naturally evolve rapidly because of the harsh environment and competition from other pathogens, which means 99.9% of modern medical antibiotics would be rendered useless against these archaic viruses. So realistically, should we worry about the Arctic melting and bringing back fatal viruses? I think there are a few other global concerns or initiatives we should prioritize over this, but the risk to our world from this vector is not trivial. Global warming is not just about environmental imbalance. It is about upsetting the natural order of life on our planet. Do your part and try to protect our planet from further damage. And as always, thank you so much for watching.